Meet Emily Turner, a 47-year-old woman from Denver, Colorado, whose life was shaken when the man she trusted most, her husband, tried to take away not only her wealth, but also the legacy of her late grandfather. Emily is not just a character in a courtroom drama. She represents countless older women who have faced betrayal, loneliness, and the painful question of who truly values them for who they are. Her story unfolds against the backdrop of a divorce trial that reveals greed, resilience, and the power of preparation. Through memories of her grandfather's vineyard, a treasured pocket watch, and the quiet strength she carried into the courtroom, Emily transforms from a vulnerable widow into a protector of other women like her. This video is brought to you by Grandma's Final Chapter, a channel dedicated to telling emotional, thought-provoking stories that shine a light on the lives of older adults, stories about strength, dignity, and the hidden battles so many endure in silence. If you believe in the wisdom of age and the courage of women like Emily, subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share where you are watching from in the comments. Together, we can build a community where seniors live not in fear, but with pride, joy, and independence. The courtroom in downtown Denver was silent except for the sound of papers being shuffled and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Heavy oak benches pressed in on both sides of the room, and the tall windows let in thin shafts of gray Colorado light that made the dust in the air seem to dance slowly, like tired ghosts. People whispered in hushed tones, reporters adjusted their notebooks, and strangers leaned forward on the wooden seats with anticipation. They had all come to see a wealthy woman's fortune put on the line. Emily Turner sat at the defendant's table, her back straight, but her stomach in knots. She was 47 years old, and this was not the life she had imagined for herself when she first said, "I do." Her hands trembled slightly as they rested on her lap, brushing against the cool leather of her handbag. Inside that bag was a sealed blue envelope, its edges worn soft from the number of times she had touched it in the past weeks. It was her only weapon in a battle she never wanted to fight. Then Mark, her husband of 6 years, stood. His chair scraped against the polished floor, a harsh sound that made several people turn their heads. He buttoned his tailored jacket, lifted his chin, and with a smirk that made Emily's stomach turn, declared in a loud, confident voice, "I will be taking half of her fortune, including the vineyard left to her by her grandfather." The words sliced through the air like a blade. The room reacted instantly. A wave of murmurs spread through the benches. Reporters' pens flew across paper. One woman in the back gasped audibly. Even the bailiff shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as if the greed dripping from Mark's tone was offensive to the solemnity of the court. Emily felt the blood rush to her ears, her heartbeat pounding like a drum inside her chest. For a brief second, she thought she might faint, but then she clenched her fists and forced herself to remain still. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her gaze moved across the room to Mark. He looked radiant in his arrogance. His blonde hair was slicked back the way he liked when he wanted to impress people. The suit he wore was expensive, and Emily knew very well whose money had bought it. His smile was wide, almost boyish, but beneath it, Emily saw the calculation. He believed the game was already won, that the judge would nod, the lawyers would haggle, and by the end of the day, he would walk away with millions. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with hair the color of steel, sat above them on the bench. Her expression was unreadable, carved from decades of watching families fracture under the weight of greed and betrayal. She tapped her pen once against the stack of documents in front of her, and then looked directly at Emily. "Mrs. Turner," she said in a calm, measured voice, "do you have a response to these claims?" Emily rose slowly, every muscle taut, her breath shallow but steady. She smoothed her skirt with one trembling hand and touched her handbag with the other. Inside it, the envelope waited. The truth waited. In that moment, Emily felt the weight of 6 years pressing against her chest. 6 years of smiles that now felt like lies. 6 years of shared dinners and whispered promises, all of which had been poisoned by a hidden agenda. Her mind flickered to the nights when Mark had held her hand, when she had believed she was loved, when she had allowed herself to dream of a future built together. Now those memories felt like ashes scattered across a courtroom floor. She turned her eyes back to Mark. He had the audacity to grin at her as if to say, "You never had a chance." Rage burned hot under her skin, but she swallowed it. No one could see her fury. What they would see instead was resolve. Emily tightened her grip on the blue envelope inside her bag. It was not just paper. It was the proof of everything Mark had tried to bury, the lifeline that connected her to her late grandfather's wisdom, and the wall that would keep her family's legacy intact. She had carried it with her every day leading up to this trial, sometimes pulling it out late at night just to hold it in her hands, whispering to herself that she was not powerless, not helpless. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken as Emily prepared to speak. Reporters leaned closer. Spectators stopped fidgeting. The judge's eyes sharpened with interest. Somewhere deep inside, Emily felt the old wound of loneliness, the years of silence after her grandfather's death, the way she had fallen for Mark because she longed for comfort and companionship. That vulnerability had nearly destroyed her. But now, in this room, she felt something stronger rising. She felt her grandfather's voice echoing, "Do not let anyone steal your worth." Emily opened her mouth, her voice soft at first, but firming as it carried through the room. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, each word measured and deliberate. "I have something this court needs to see." The courtroom stilled. Even Mark's confident expression faltered, his smile twitching as though a shadow had passed over it. Emily reached slowly for her bag. Her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the envelope. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when greed would be unmasked and justice would find its voice. And as her hand closed around the envelope, Emily thought of the countless women who had walked into courtrooms like this one, terrified and uncertain, facing men who believed they could manipulate and control forever. Today, she would not only fight for herself, but for them too. If you have ever witnessed injustice like this, share this story so more people understand the dangers of being deceived in marriage. As Emily's fingers pressed against the edge of the blue envelope inside her handbag, her mind slipped backward, past the polished walls of the courtroom, past the years of lies, to the night 6 years earlier when her world had first begun to unravel. It was winter then. Snow fell thick across Denver, muffling the city's usual hum. Emily had been 41, freshly grieving the loss of her grandfather, the man who had raised her from childhood after her parents died in a car accident. He was not just family, he was her anchor, her compass, the only constant in a world that often felt too harsh. The day of his funeral remained etched in her memory. The sky had been the color of slate, the air sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth. She remembered standing beside his coffin, clutching the small pocket watch he had left her. The watch was old, its brass surface scratched by decades of use, but it still ticked with quiet determination. On the back, her grandfather had engraved her initials and one line, "Never let anyone diminish your worth." That watch became her lifeline in the days that followed. At night, when the silence of her empty home threatened to swallow her, she would hold it in her palm and press it to her chest, listening to its steady beat as though it carried his voice. Yet even as she clung to it, loneliness seeped into every corner of her life. Her consulting firm demanded long hours, and friends, though kind, had families of their own to return to. Emily found herself eating dinners alone, the tick of the watch her only company. It was in that fragile state that Mark appeared. She first noticed him at a business conference in San Francisco. He was tall, his smile bright and easy, the kind of man who knew how to draw a room's attention without seeming to try. He carried himself with confidence, the kind that suggested he had nothing to prove. When their eyes met across the crowded lobby, he walked over with a charm so smooth it felt rehearsed, yet disarmingly warm. "You look like you could use some company," he said, handing her a glass of wine. Emily had laughed softly, though her throat was tight with grief. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there," he replied, his voice lowering as if to share a secret. "Loss leaves a shadow, but shadows mean there was once light." Those words struck her deeply. No one else had spoken so directly about her pain. Friends had offered condolences, but Mark acknowledged her grief without pity. He listened when she spoke of her grandfather, asked questions about her firm, praised her intelligence. When she doubted herself, he insisted she was remarkable. He told her she deserved joy, laughter, companionship. Emily wanted to believe him. After months of feeling invisible, here was a man who made her feel seen. The nights that followed blurred into a whirlwind of attention she had not experienced in years. Flowers delivered to her office, late-night phone calls where he asked about her dreams and fears, dinners where he raised his glass and said, "To the strongest woman I've ever met." His admiration felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Yet even in those early days, there were moments that unsettled her. She remembered one evening when Mark asked casually about the vineyard her grandfather had owned. "It must be worth a fortune," he said, his tone light, but his eyes sharp with curiosity. Emily brushed it off, saying the vineyard was more memory than money, but something about the way he lingered on the topic had made her pause. Still, she silenced her doubts. Grief has a way of making people crave comfort, and Mark provided it in abundance. One evening, she sat on her porch with him, the pocket watch warm in her hand. She had just confessed how much she missed her grandfather's advice, his steady presence. Mark had taken her hand gently, his thumb brushing over the watch. "Then let me be that person for you," he whispered. "Someone who reminds you of your worth." Her heart ached at the promise. She wanted so desperately to believe she could find safety again. She mistook his persistence for devotion, his charm for sincerity. Looking back now, in the heavy silence of the courtroom, Emily saw those moments with painful clarity. Mark had not been moved by her grief. He had seen it as an opening, a crack in the armor of a woman who had always been too strong, too independent. Behind his gentle eyes and practiced smile was ambition, and behind his words of love was calculation. She remembered the watch again, the engraving that had once comforted her. "Never let anyone diminish your worth." For 6 years, she had almost forgotten those words, lulled by a man who made her question herself, who used her loneliness as leverage. But today, with the blue envelope in her bag and her grandfather's voice echoing in her mind, she realized the truth. Mark had mistaken her grief for weakness. He had underestimated the woman her grandfather had raised. Emily lifted her chin in the courtroom, her fingers still curled around the envelope. The past no longer crushed her. It fueled her. This fight was not only about money, it was about reclaiming her dignity, honoring the man who had believed in her when she was a child with nothing but dreams. And as she breathed in the hushed air of the courtroom, Emily vowed she would not fail him now. Emily often wondered how quickly it had all happened, how she had gone from a grieving granddaughter to a bride dressed in white under the golden sun of Napa Valley. Looking back, the timeline itself should have raised alarms, but in the moment it felt like fate pressing her forward. Mark courted her with a relentless charm. Each week brought something new, a handwritten letter on thick parchment, a surprise dinner at an intimate restaurant, tickets to the symphony where he whispered how radiant she looked under the soft glow of stage lights. He had a way of making every moment feel curated, as if their love story were being staged for an audience that only they could see. When Emily expressed hesitation, when she admitted that the scars of losing her grandfather still ached, Mark leaned into her vulnerability with a gentleness that felt genuine. "Life is short," he would say, his voice warm, his hands folded around hers. "Why wait for happiness when it is right in front of you?" It was exactly what she longed to hear. For years, Emily had buried herself in work, convincing herself that career success could fill the void of family she no longer had. Mark arrived with promises of partnership, of laughter echoing through hallways, of holiday dinners surrounded by warmth. He painted pictures of the life she secretly desired, and she believed him. 9 months after they met, Mark proposed. The evening had been orchestrated like a scene from a film. A vineyard overlooking rolling California hills, candles flickering along a wooden deck, a string quartet playing softly as the sun melted into the horizon. He dropped to one knee with a diamond that sparkled like starlight and asked her to be his wife. Her breath caught in her throat. The world around her blurred. Sandra, her longtime neighbor and closest friend, was the only one who hesitated when Emily shared the news. Over coffee in Emily's kitchen, Sandra frowned, stirring cream into her cup with slow, deliberate motions. "Emily," she said gently, "men who rush often carry secrets. They move quickly because they don't want you to see the cracks before you commit." Emily bristled. "You don't understand. He has been there for me when no one else was. He listens. He cares." Sandra's eyes softened, but she did not relent. "I just want you to be careful. Grief makes us see what we need, not always what is real." Emily waved away the warning, unwilling to let doubt creep into her fragile hope. She wanted to believe in Mark. She wanted to believe that after years of emptiness, she could finally build something lasting. Their wedding was lavish, set among vineyards in Napa Valley, where sunlight spilled across rows of vines and guests toasted with glasses of sparkling wine. Emily remembered the sound of laughter, the shimmer of her gown, the way Mark held her hand as if anchoring her to a new destiny. Reporters from lifestyle magazines captured the event, painting them as a power couple, the successful consultant and her charming husband. Yet beneath the shimmer of champagne flutes and the sparkle of chandeliers, subtle details gnawed at her subconscious. Mark insisted on expensive touches she would not have chosen herself: imported flowers, a custom-tailored suit, a honeymoon in Italy that drained more money than she was comfortable admitting. When she questioned the extravagance, he kissed her cheek and said, "You deserve the best." Emily convinced herself it was love. She told herself she was lucky. Still, on the night before the wedding, as she sat in her hotel suite holding her grandfather's pocket watch, Sandra's words echoed in her mind. "Men who rush often carry secrets." She closed her eyes and silenced the warning with a prayer. "Please let this be real. Please let me be loved for who I am, not what I have." In the years that followed, Emily would replay that prayer often, haunted by how desperately she had clung to it. What she could not see then was the truth waiting just beyond the glittering veil. Mark had studied her loneliness the way a hunter studies a trail. His affection was not born of love, but of calculation. His courtship was not devotion, but strategy. And while Emily twirled across the dance floor in her white gown, believing she was stepping into a future of partnership, Mark smiled for the cameras with an entirely different vision in mind. The illusion of love had been sealed with vows, and beneath the golden lights of Napa Valley, Emily's heart had been placed into the hands of the one man who would later try to break it completely. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of fittings, flower arrangements, and the hum of anticipation. Emily's life felt as though it had been swept into a current too fast to resist. Amid the rush, one voice remained steady and practical, that of her longtime attorney, Linda Harper. Linda was a woman who had seen too much to be naive. In her early 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head and eyes that missed nothing, she had been advising Emily for years on business contracts and financial decisions. When Emily told her about Mark's proposal, Linda's first reaction was not the warm congratulations of a friend, but the measured caution of a woman who had witnessed the fallout of many broken promises. "Emily," Linda said during one meeting, her tone firm but not unkind, "you must protect yourself. You have worked hard for what you built. Marriage can be about love, but the law sees it as a contract. A prenuptial agreement is not a betrayal. It is insurance." Emily had flushed with discomfort. The thought of placing legal boundaries around something as romantic as marriage felt wrong. It made her worry that Mark would see it as mistrust, that he would think she valued money more than their love. "I do not want him to believe I doubt him," she whispered, almost as if ashamed of her own hesitation. Linda leaned forward, her voice softer. "I am not asking you to doubt him. I am asking you to believe in yourself. Men and women can change. Grief and wealth can bring out parts of people we never expected. A prenup ensures that whatever happens, your grandfather's legacy stays in your hands." That word, legacy, struck Emily deeply. She thought of the vineyard, of the pocket watch, of the nights spent remembering the man who had raised her. She nodded reluctantly, though her heart still twisted with unease. When she finally broached the subject with Mark, her voice trembled. They were having dinner on the patio of her townhouse, candlelight flickering across his face. She cleared her throat and said, "Linda suggested we sign a prenuptial agreement. It protects the vineyard, the house, and everything I have worked for." For a moment, she feared his reaction. She expected anger or wounded pride or accusations of mistrust. Instead, Mark threw his head back and laughed. "Emily," he said with a grin, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I love you, not your money. If a stack of papers makes you feel safer, then let us sign them. I have nothing to hide. We are building a life together, not a business contract." His casual dismissal melted her worries. She even felt embarrassed for doubting him. Mark signed the papers without reading them closely, scribbling his name with the same flourish he used when signing a credit card receipt. He kissed her hand afterward, whispering, "See? I told you. My commitment is to you, not numbers on a page." In that moment, Emily's heart swelled with relief. She saw his nonchalance as a gesture of love, proof that he truly cared for her rather than her inheritance. The prenup became to her not a shield, but a romantic symbol of trust. Yet beneath that trust lay a truth she could not yet grasp. Mark's easy acceptance was not born of confidence, but arrogance. He had assumed such a document would never matter, that his charm would always give him the upper hand. He had underestimated her, underestimated Linda, and underestimated the strength that grief had quietly been shaping in her. Years later, as Emily stood in court with the blue envelope pressed against her palm, she remembered the moment he signed so easily, the way he laughed at the idea of legal protection. What she once saw as a reassurance of love had become her salvation. The very contract she had been ashamed to suggest would soon become the fortress that guarded her future. And in the silence of the courtroom, with Mark's smug grin beginning to falter, Emily realized that Linda Harper's wisdom had been more than legal advice. It had been a lifeline, disguised as caution, waiting for the day it would be needed most. 18 months into their marriage, Emily's life shifted in a way she could never have predicted. The letter arrived on a clear spring morning, delivered in a thick cream envelope that carried the familiar seal of her grandfather's attorney. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling beside her as she broke the wax and unfolded the carefully typed document. Her eyes scanned the words, but the meaning did not fully register until she reached the final page. The vineyard in Sonoma, the old wooden house on the hillside, and the carefully managed investments amounting to $3.1 million were now hers. Her grandfather had left her everything. The breath caught in her throat. For years, she had assumed there would be something, perhaps the vineyard or a small inheritance, but the scope of it overwhelmed her. Tears pricked her eyes, not from the number printed at the bottom of the page, but from the weight of his faith in her. Even in death, he had entrusted her with his life's work, the fruit of decades of sacrifice. She pressed her hand to her pocket watch, whispering, "Thank you, Grandpa." When she told Mark that evening, his reaction struck her like a splash of cold water. His eyes lit up, wide and gleaming, as though someone had switched on a light inside him. $3.1 million, he repeated, the words rolling off his tongue with a kind of awe. Then he laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Emily, we are rich. We are going to live the life we deserve." It was a small detail, that one word, we. It should have pierced through her euphoria. It should have warned her that his joy was not about her security, her legacy, or her grandfather's memory, but about access. Yet she silenced the unease that rippled through her. She told herself that marriage was about sharing, about building together. Still, later that night as she stood alone in front of the mirror, holding the pocket watch in her hand, she felt the chill of doubt creep in. Her grandfather's engraving echoed in her mind, "Never let anyone diminish your worth." She closed her eyes and tried to believe that Mark's excitement was nothing more than love expressed in exuberance. But the weeks that followed painted a different picture. Mark began talking of upgrades. He suggested they sell her modest townhouse and purchase something grander, something that would reflect their new status. He showed her brochures for luxury cars, insisting that as the wife of a successful consultant and heir to a vineyard, she deserved to drive in style. He joined an exclusive golf club without consulting her, presenting the membership fee as if it were no more consequential than buying groceries. Emily found herself caught between pride and apprehension. She wanted to honor her grandfather's memory, to manage his estate with care. Yet Mark's enthusiasm was infectious, and she was tired of always being cautious. When she hesitated, he leaned in with that familiar, disarming smile. "Emily, you spent years working hard, being careful. Let us enjoy life, you and me together." Isn't that what he would have wanted? She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that her grandfather, who had known only toil and sacrifice, would be glad to see her finally embrace joy. But deep inside, a voice whispered that Mark's vision of joy was rooted in indulgence, not in gratitude. One afternoon, they traveled to Sonoma to walk the vineyard. The rows of vines stretched endlessly under the California sun, green leaves rustling in the breeze. Emily ran her fingers over the rough bark, inhaling the earthy scent that brought her back to summers spent there as a child. The land felt sacred, a place where her grandfather's spirit lingered. Mark walked beside her, but his gaze was not on the vines. It was fixed on the house perched on the hill, its weathered wood and sagging roof a reminder of its age. "We should tear this down," he said casually. "Build something bigger, modern, worthy of what this estate represents." Emily froze, her hand still resting on the vine. "This was his home," she whispered. "He built it with his hands." Mark shrugged, already pulling out his phone to show her designs of sprawling mansions with glass walls and infinity pools. "Legacy is not about walls, Emily. It is about opportunity. This could be spectacular if you stop clinging to the past." The words struck her like a slap. She said nothing, but that night, as she sat alone in the creaking wooden house, she felt the hollow space between them widen. The turning point had come. She did not yet know it, but the inheritance that should have been a blessing was becoming a wedge, exposing cracks in their marriage that had always been there, hidden beneath charm and romance. As Mark dreamed aloud of wealth and grandeur, Emily pressed the pocket watch to her chest once more. The ticking was steady, grounding, as though her grandfather's spirit was reminding her of the truth she tried so hard to ignore. Mark saw her inheritance as theirs. She needed to remember it was hers. At first, Emily told herself it was only excitement, that Mark's sudden hunger for more was a natural response to the windfall they had received. But as weeks turned into months, the excitement calcified into a lifestyle, and the lifestyle quickly became a declaration of who Mark truly was. The first sign came when Mark announced one evening, over a glass of wine, that he was leaving his job. "I want to be here for you, Em," he said, reaching across the table with a practiced tenderness. "Why should I waste my days making money for someone else when you and I already have the foundation for something greater? This is our chance to build a new life together." Emily's heart skipped. She wanted to believe him, but beneath the words was a shadow she could not shake. His decision meant she would carry the weight of responsibility, the one who must manage the vineyard, the estate, the investments. Still, she nodded, unwilling to stir conflict. Within months, Mark's schedule shifted from early mornings at the office to late mornings at the golf course. He spoke casually of networking with men of influence, of forming partnerships, of exploring opportunities. What Emily saw instead was a husband basking in luxury. A silver sports car appeared in their driveway, sleek and glinting in the sunlight. He brushed off her hesitation with a grin. "It is not just a car, it is an image. People respect success when they see it." The bills piled up quickly. Membership at an exclusive golf club, weekend getaways that felt less like romance and more like indulgence. Then came the ill-fated investment. Mark poured $40,000 into a friend's restaurant venture without consulting her, convinced it would become the next culinary sensation in Colorado. Within a year, the business failed, leaving nothing but debt and excuses. Emily sat with the numbers spread out across her desk one night, her hands shaking as she added the totals. The inheritance was dwindling, not because of necessity, but because of his relentless appetite. She pressed the pocket watch in her palm, listening to the steady tick that seemed to mock the reckless silence of Mark's choices. Yet the most painful wound came not from money, but from words. At a dinner party hosted by one of Mark's golfing companions, Emily overheard him introducing himself with a flourish. His glass raised high, his voice carrying easily across the room, he declared, "My wife and I run the Turner Vineyard. It is our pride, our family legacy." Emily froze. The vineyard was not their legacy. It was her grandfather's gift, her inheritance, her burden, and her blessing. Yet in Mark's retelling, it had been absorbed into his identity, a trophy polished and paraded for strangers. She forced a polite smile, but inside her chest a storm brewed. In that moment she understood with painful clarity. Mark had never loved her for herself. He had loved the access she provided. Later that evening, as they drove home, she turned to him, her voice quiet but sharp. "Why did you say the vineyard was ours? It belongs to my family, to me." Mark's laugh was dismissive. "Emily, marriage is about sharing. What is yours is mine. People do not care about technicalities, they care about appearances. Do you want me to look like a man who lives off his wife?" The words cut deeper than any argument could. It was not shame that he felt, but entitlement. He did not see himself as a partner, but as a rightful heir to what she had received. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with the truth she had tried so long to ignore. Mark's affection had never been about the woman she was. It was about the wealth she carried. The vineyard, the house, the investments, these were the objects of his devotion. And beneath the memory of his earlier smile, beneath the charm that once made her feel chosen, Emily saw the hunger of a man who had planned his place at her table from the moment he met her. She closed her eyes, gripping the pocket watch tightly in her hand. The tick was steady, unyielding, a reminder of her grandfather's words, "Never let anyone diminish your worth." But as she lay in the dark, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside her, she knew the illusion had shattered. The man who had promised to love her had revealed himself at last, and the legacy she had once thought would bind them together had instead become the proof that he had never truly loved her at all. The betrayal came quietly, the way storms sometimes arrive without thunder, only a sudden shift in the air that makes you shiver. Emily had not been searching for secrets that evening. She had simply been tidying Mark's study, gathering receipts that lay scattered across his desk, when the faint glow of his laptop screen caught her attention. He had left it open, as if daring the truth to be discovered. Her eyes lingered for only a moment, but the subject line of one email froze her where she stood. Divorce strategy. Her heart lurched. Fingers trembling, she clicked. The words on the screen cut through her like glass. Mark had been corresponding with an attorney she did not recognize, outlining a plan to file for divorce when the timing was most favorable for asset division. The message was blunt. "We wait until the second quarter to maximize his claim. With her inheritance, half of that vineyard and the investments will secure his financial freedom." Her breath left her body in a rush. The room blurred, the sound of her pulse roaring in her ears. For a long moment, she could not move. It was not only the treachery of the words, but the coldness of their construction. This was not the voice of a husband. This was the voice of a strategist preparing to take everything she held dear. She lowered herself into the chair, her body heavy, as if gravity itself had grown cruel. Her chest ached, not just from heartbreak, but from the humiliation of knowing the man who kissed her forehead at night, who laughed at her jokes, had been plotting her ruin behind closed doors. Tears pricked her eyes, but they did not fall. Instead, something steadier rose within her. She pressed her hand to the pocket watch she had placed on the desk earlier, its steady ticking a reminder that she was not powerless. Grief threatened to drown her, but beneath it lived something stronger, resolve. Emily knew she could not confront Mark, not yet. Confrontation would give him time to twist the story, to disguise his motives, to play the role of the wronged husband. No, this battle would not be fought with emotion, it would be fought with patience. The next morning, under the pretense of visiting a client, Emily drove to Linda Harper's office. The familiar brass plaque on the door glinted in the sun, and stepping inside felt like stepping into the arms of reason. Linda looked up from her desk, her sharp eyes narrowing as soon as she saw Emily's pale face. "What has he done?" Linda asked without preamble. Emily slid the printed email across the desk, her hands steady now, though her stomach still twisted. "He is planning to divorce me," she said softly. "Not because he is unhappy, but because he thinks it is the right moment to take half of everything." Linda read the email with the detached calm of a surgeon examining an X-ray. When she looked up, there was no pity in her eyes, only fire. "Then we will not give him the chance. We will control the narrative. You came to me at the right time, Emily. This is not the end of your story. This is where it begins." For the next hour, they mapped the strategy. Linda reminded Emily of the prenuptial agreement, the document signed so carelessly years earlier. She explained how it protected not only her current assets, but any inheritance, provided it was kept separate from marital accounts. Every reckless purchase Mark had made, every dollar wasted on cars and clubs and doomed investments, was his responsibility alone. Emily listened, her sorrow slowly transforming into focus. She asked questions, clarified details, and by the end of the meeting, she felt something she had not felt in years: power. When she left Linda's office, the city seemed different. The air felt clearer, the sidewalks firmer beneath her feet. She was still wounded, but she was no longer lost. Mark had tried to turn her into prey, but he had underestimated her patience, her intelligence, and the strength born of survival. At home, Mark greeted her with a kiss, his smile charming as ever. Emily looked at him with new eyes. The mask of love he wore no longer fooled her. She saw the calculations behind every word, the entitlement behind every touch. He believed he was winning. She knew the truth. That night, as he slept peacefully beside her, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her fingers wrapped tightly around the pocket watch. Its steady rhythm matched her own heartbeat. "Never let anyone diminish your worth." Her grandfather's words were no longer a memory. They were a call to action. Emily did not collapse under the weight of betrayal. She sharpened herself against it. She knew now that the courtroom would not be a place of defeat, but a stage for revelation. And when the moment came, she would be ready to expose Mark's greed to the world. Do you believe the true strength of older women is found in patience and preparation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The courtroom in Denver felt colder that morning than Emily had expected. Light from the tall windows fell in sharp lines across the polished floor, cutting the room into squares of shadow and brightness. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens ready. Spectators leaned forward, hungry for drama. The air was thick with expectation, as if everyone present sensed that something more than money would be decided within these walls. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his golden hair shining under the fluorescent lights. He exuded confidence, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, the posture of a man who believed victory was already his. Beside him, his attorney, a sharp-faced man named Gerald Kane, stacked folders with deliberate precision. They whispered to one another, as if sealing the outcome with their own certainty. Emily sat across from them, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight though her stomach churned with nerves. The blue envelope rested inside her handbag like a heartbeat, steady and sure. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet the weight of it now pressed heavy against her chest. Judge Margaret Sullivan entered with the dignity of someone who had presided over 2 decades of broken marriages and fractured promises. Her hair, silver and severe, framed a face that betrayed no emotion. She took her seat and began reviewing the initial filings. The quiet rustle of papers echoed through the room, underscoring the tension. "Your Honor," Gerald began with a confident bow of his head, "my client seeks equitable division of marital assets." This includes, of course, the Turner Vineyard in Sonoma, the mountain property in Colorado, and the inheritance funds which Mrs. Turner received during the marriage. Under state law, these are all subject to division. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Mark leaned back in his chair, his hands folded smugly across his stomach. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She knew this was the moment her grandfather had prepared her for, the moment Linda had reminded her would come. She rose slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Every head in the room turned toward her. "Mrs. Turner," Judge Sullivan said, her tone measured, "do you have a response to these claims?" Emily's throat was dry, but her voice emerged steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe there is something the court must see before proceeding further." She reached into her handbag. The blue envelope was cool beneath her fingertips, its surface worn from weeks of anticipation. She walked toward the bench, the click of her heels against the floor echoing like a drumbeat. The room held its breath. With both hands, she placed the envelope before the judge. "This is a prenuptial agreement," she said clearly, her gaze never leaving Mark's face. "It was signed before our marriage, witnessed and notarized. It outlines exactly what assets remain separate property." The effect was instantaneous. The courtroom erupted in whispers. A few gasps broke the silence. Reporters lifted their pens in unison as though the scene were scripted for them. Mark's confident expression shattered. His face drained of color, his eyes darting from the envelope to Emily and back again. He muttered something under his breath, his lips trembling with disbelief. Gerald reached for the document with unsteady fingers, his earlier poise dissolving as he fumbled with his notes. "Your Honor," Gerald stammered, "we were not informed of any such agreement. This is highly irregular." "Silence, Mr. Kane," Judge Sullivan interrupted, her voice sharp. She opened the envelope with deliberate care, sliding out the neatly bound document. The crackle of paper filled the room as she began to read. Emily returned to her seat, her hands folded calmly in her lap, though inside her heart thundered. Across the room, Mark's panic grew visible. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened, his fingers drummed nervously against the table. He leaned toward Gerald, whispering frantically, but Gerald's face only grew paler with each passing page. The judge read for several minutes. The courtroom seemed frozen in time, every ear straining to catch the sound of her turning pages. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and sharp as steel. "This appears to be a properly executed prenuptial agreement," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "It is dated prior to the marriage, signed by both parties, and notarized with full acknowledgement of financial disclosures. Unless proven otherwise, it stands as binding." The impact of her words rippled through the benches like a shockwave. Reporters scribbled, heads shaking in disbelief. A woman in the audience laughed softly before covering her mouth. Mark shot to his feet, his voice breaking. "This cannot be right. I never signed anything like that. She tricked me. She—" "Mr. Turner," Judge Sullivan cut him off, her voice sharp as a whip. "You will remain seated and silent. Outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom." Emily did not flinch. She held her composure, though inside she felt the fire of vindication rising. She glanced briefly at Mark, who now looked less like the golden husband he had once presented himself to be, and more like a desperate man clinging to a crumbling illusion. What she had placed on the judge's bench was more than paper. It was her shield, the proof that love built on deceit cannot survive scrutiny. It was the final reminder that true love never fears transparency, that trust needs no disguise. And as the courtroom buzzed with shock and speculation, Emily Turner sat quietly in her seat, her hands once again resting in her lap, the pocket watch hidden inside her jacket ticking like a silent victory drum. The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the sound of papers shuffling as Judge Margaret Harper adjusted her glasses and looked over the final pages of the prenuptial agreement. The room was so still that Emily could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning above her, a low drone that seemed to emphasize the weight of the moment. Reporters leaned forward, their pens poised in the air as if afraid to miss a single word. Mark sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, his face flushed with anger, his hands gripping the edge of the polished wood as if it could anchor him against the storm he felt rising. Gerald, his attorney, shifted uncomfortably beside him, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. Finally, Judge Harper set the document down and raised her gaze to the court. Her expression was unreadable, her voice steady, but each word carried the force of a gavel. This court finds the prenuptial agreement to be valid, properly executed, and legally binding. Accordingly, all inheritance received by Mrs. Turner remains her separate property. The Turner vineyard, the mountain property, and the investment accounts are excluded from any claim of division. A wave of reaction rippled through the courtroom. Some gasped aloud, others whispered, and a few even clapped before the bailiff silenced them with a stern glance. Judge Harper continued, her tone sharp as a blade. Furthermore, due to the terms of this agreement, Mr. Turner is entitled to no portion of Mrs. Turner's premarital assets or inheritance. Additionally, debts incurred individually during the marriage remain the responsibility of the party who incurred them. Evidence provided shows that Mr. Turner accumulated a total of $92,000 in personal debt. That debt remains solely his. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Spectators exchanged wide-eyed looks, their whispers a mix of disbelief and delight. Mark surged to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "This is outrageous!" he shouted, his voice cracking as it echoed against the high ceiling. "She tricked me. She set a trap. 6 years of my life wasted, and now she walks away with everything?" His voice shook as he turned to Emily, eyes wild. "You stole my youth, my 6 years gone." The bailiff stepped forward, but Judge Harper raised her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Turner," she ordered, her voice low but commanding. "You will not disrupt these proceedings further." Emily stood slowly, her eyes meeting Mark's across the courtroom. She felt no fear now, only clarity. Her voice was calm, but the words cut with precision. "Your youth was not stolen, Mark. You traded it yourself. You exchanged it for greed, not for love. That was your choice, not mine." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the line they knew would become tomorrow's headline. Mark's face contorted, his mouth opening as if to fire back, but no words came. His body sagged as though the weight of the judgment had drained every ounce of fight from him. He collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the table before him. Judge Harper lifted her gavel. "This court grants the petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Turner. No assets shall be awarded to Mr. Turner. His debts remain his own responsibility. This case is concluded." The sharp crack of the gavel echoed like thunder, final and absolute. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs and shuffling as people began to rise. Emily remained standing, her shoulders straight, her breath steady. She looked around the room and saw faces lit with fascination, some with admiration. For months she had been preparing for this moment, and now it had come to pass exactly as Linda had promised. Mark sat motionless, his once polished confidence reduced to silence. Gerald whispered urgently to him, but it was clear that no strategy remained. His empire of illusions had crumbled in less than an hour. Emily turned toward the doors, her steps measured. Each footfall felt lighter than the last, as though a chain had been removed from around her heart. She had walked into this courtroom burdened with fear and betrayal, but she was walking out with freedom and dignity intact. At the threshold, she paused and glanced back one final time. Mark's eyes met hers, desperate and hollow. For a moment she almost pitied him, but then she remembered every deception, every lie, every smile that had masked calculation. Pity faded. "Goodbye, Mark," she whispered, though only she could hear it. The heavy doors closed behind her, the sound echoing like the final line of a story that had taken too long to end. And in her pocket, the old watch ticked faithfully, a quiet reminder of the man who had taught her never to let anyone diminish her worth. The months that followed the trial revealed the true measure of consequences. Mark, once so certain of his charm and cleverness, watched his carefully crafted image disintegrate. News of the courtroom drama spread quickly across Denver and beyond. Articles painted him not as the polished businessman he claimed to be, but as a cautionary tale, a man undone by his own greed. His debts mounted, the luxury car was repossessed, and the golf club that once welcomed him revoked his membership when the fees went unpaid. Within half a year, bankruptcy swallowed what little remained of his independence. Stripped of status and dignity, he returned to Arizona, moving back into his aging parents' modest home. There he lived not as a man of prestige, but as someone forced to start again with little more than regret. Those who once admired him now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Invitations stopped arriving. The world he had built on deception vanished, leaving him with silence and the bitter company of his failures. Emily's path was different. The trial had not only freed her from Mark's grasp, but had awakened a new purpose within her. For weeks after the judgment, she reflected on her grandfather's legacy. The vineyard still stood proudly under the Sonoma sun. The house on the hill creaked with the same familiar sounds of wood and wind, and the pocket watch continued to tick steadily, grounding her in memory. But Emily realized that true legacy was not measured in acres of vines or lines on a financial statement. It was measured in what one gave back. She met with Linda Harper and Sandra, her oldest friend, to discuss the future. Over cups of tea in the wooden house her grandfather had loved, Emily outlined her vision. With a portion of the inheritance, she would establish the Turner Foundation, a trust dedicated to protecting women who found themselves in situations like hers. Its mission was clear: provide legal guidance for prenuptial agreements, offer resources for women facing financial abuse, and create a community where middle-aged and older women could reclaim their dignity without fear. The foundation opened quietly at first, a small office with 2 rooms and a team of volunteers. But word spread quickly. Women began arriving, some timid, others desperate, all carrying stories of betrayal and survival. Emily greeted each of them personally when she could, listening to their voices with the patience she had once been denied. For every woman who signed a prenuptial agreement with the foundation's help, Emily felt her grandfather's presence, as if he were nodding in approval. In time, the foundation grew. It became more than a service, it became a movement. Women who once felt powerless discovered that protection was not selfishness, but strength. They learned that love built on respect could withstand boundaries, and that love built on greed was never love at all. One autumn evening, Emily sat on the wide porch of the old wooden house. The vineyard stretched before her in neat rows, golden leaves catching the last light of the setting sun. In her hand, she held the pocket watch, its brass surface warm against her palm. She traced the engraving with her thumb. "Never let anyone diminish your worth." She smiled softly, speaking into the quiet. "Grandpa, you saved me, and now I will save others. Your lesson will not end with me." The house around her creaked as if in agreement. The vines swayed gently in the evening breeze, and for the first time in years, Emily felt not only free, but fulfilled. She had turned betrayal into strength, loss into purpose, and solitude into community. Her story was no longer only her own. It was part of something larger, something that would echo long after her own footsteps faded from the earth. If you believe that love must always walk hand in hand with respect, subscribe to our channel and join us in sharing stories that inspire dignity, resilience, and true independence. Together, we can build a community where no one is diminished, and every final chapter is written with pride. Every story leaves behind an echo, and Emily's journey is more than the tale of one woman standing against betrayal. It is a reminder that strength does not arrive suddenly, but grows quietly through years of experience, through pain endured and lessons remembered. Emily walked into the courtroom with a broken heart, but she walked out carrying not only justice for herself, but hope for countless others. Her grandfather's wisdom became a compass, guiding her to transform her grief into purpose, her loneliness into community, and her vulnerability into a foundation that protects those who might otherwise be forgotten. Perhaps you see pieces of your own story reflected in hers. Perhaps you too have carried secrets, endured disappointments, or fought battles no one else could see. Or maybe you have stood beside someone you love, watching them struggle to hold on to dignity in a world that too often overlooks the value of older voices. If so, let Emily's triumph be a reminder that no one is truly powerless. The right moment, the right choice, and the right belief in one's worth can change everything. Here at Grandma's Final Chapter, we share these stories not only to entertain, but to remind you that life's later chapters can be filled with courage, renewal, and meaning. Every ending carries within it the seed of a beginning, and every wound can become the soil where resilience grows. If this story touched you, we invite you to be part of our growing circle. Tell us your own story in the comments below, because your voice matters and may give strength to someone else who needs it. Like this video if you believe in the dignity of women and men who have walked through fire and come out stronger. Share it with a friend or loved one who may need a reminder that respect and love must always go hand in hand. And do not forget to subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so that you never miss the next story of hope, justice, and the quiet power of ordinary people who refuse to be diminished. Together, we can keep writing endings that are not about loss, but about renewal. Endings that prove the final chapter can still be the most powerful one of all.